Great. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Siobhan, and I am the chair of Second Generation, a political action committee that seeks to get immigrants more engaged in the political process. And we particularly focus on immigrant communities that have not been fully reflected or included in our political system. So thank you all for joining us today. Time is one of our most important currencies, and I am really grateful that you've given us this time to talk about immigrant issues and the amazing candidates that we are supporting in this election. Though we're all under shelter in place restrictions in Pennsylvania, we have two really important elections coming up. The primary election on June 2nd, and then also, of course, the general election in November. And as an immigrant and somebody who cares about the immigrant communities, I think these elections are particularly crucial. It didn't take long for a global pandemic to turn into a Chinese virus that was being spread by foreigners. President Trump has already, closed the borders, and now he's talking about putting even further restrictions on immigration, starting with green card holders. So it's not surprising to see a rise in isolationism and xenophobia. And it's really important, I think, for activists like ourselves to get out there and to make sure that the voices about the importance of immigration to the United States are heard. So, if you are an immigrant, if you love immigrants, if you believe that diversity and immigration improve the United States, please support Second Generation and please get out and support our candidates. And with that, I'm going to hand over to my board member, Bhavani, who's going to lead this conversation with Nina Ahmad, who is one of our endorsed candidates for this election. So, Bhavani.
Thank you for that very nice introduction, Siobhan. As she mentioned, welcome everybody to this session that's being hosted by Second Generation. We are incredibly excited to be taking some time with Nina Ahmad, who's running for Auditor General. And before we kind of get right into it, I just wanted to kind of preface by saying, if we could keep the questions at the end kind of direct and short, as well as the responses, that'll be really great because we can keep, keep the conversation going and fit as much content and information as possible into this 30-minute session. So again, thank you, Nina, for joining us. And So just kind of getting right into it, one of the reasons why we were incredibly excited to support you for your candidacy was because of the strong thread and the narrative when it comes to immigration and the experiences that you had. And so I'd really like to kind of dig into how has being an immigrant impacted your campaign and your journey running the statewide campaign?
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me and most importantly endorsing me. I'm thrilled and humbled by that, particularly to be endorsed by people either who are immigrants themselves or are children of immigrants or have close relationships with immigrants and understand what lens we bring when we are in, living life here. So as you might know, Bhavani and others might not, I'm an immigrant from the country of Bangladesh, and I lived through the War of Independence that actually created Bangladesh. And that actually set my worldview of my life going forward. In 9 months, 3 million people were killed to the point where, as a young girl, I watched bodies pile up sides of the roads, kind of gruesome kind of genocide that went on. And 200,000 women were brutalized, women and girls actually. And that taught me, one, that people will make the ultimate sacrifice for freedom, and two, that women were second-class citizens and used as tools of war. So, and when I came here to basically come to a place with more stability, both of those things were true again, because I saw what people had done to fight for freedom here and continue to fight for freedom here, particularly around race war lines. And we have definitely weaponized race in this society. And of course, we're still struggling to level the playing field for women. So all of that to say that I'm very clear about using these lens to be a campaign as a candidate I look forward to doing that if I am successful as an elected official serving in as a public servant. I did that when I was a deputy mayor in Philadelphia. I've done it every place I've gone because that's part of who I am. In sense of campaigning, I think one of the issues, you have to kind of balance how much time you have to introduce yourself to people. I always make sure people know I'm an immigrant. So, and people have to take the whole me. I don't say one thing in this room and another thing in another room. Authenticity is really critical to me. Integrity. This job is about integrity. This is about making sure your tax dollars are used with integrity. So I think the immigrant experience actually is very helpful in some spaces because people understand that I've lived through some level of struggle. So I can really relate to many in Pennsylvania who are still struggling. So those are the frames I use. And I haven't, there's some oddball people who are gonna call me a terrorist or some such stuff that happens on social media. I have to say it's been limited this time around. This is the second time I'm running for office. It's just part of who I am. Everybody knows that's who I am. That they have to take the whole package.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you mentioned that your unique experiences sort of give you this lens through which you can view the world that's unique and puts you in a position to help these communities that have been struggling with these sorts of realities. And Siobhan mentioned this in her introduction that it didn't take very long for people to kind of bring out the nastiness when it comes to the current situation surrounding COVID-19. And so given your candidacy and what you represent and the sort of campaign that you've been building, how do you think your journey will actually impact these communities? If it were to go the way that you hope it will.
Yeah. So as I said, this is a very important lens for me. And if I were to be your next Auditor General, I find that to be a very powerful position to actually message the role all of us Pennsylvanians have, whether we're foreign-born or native-born. And the ways I would actually implement that vision is to say, when we do audits, when we check and see our tax dollars are used in integrity, I want to actually see if that includes everyone, meaning the equity in the distribution of dollars. So when you pay your taxes, that goes up and that's distributed back to different departments who then either work with nonprofits or other spaces where services are delivered back to you. I want to see whether or not the departments within the government and those who work with have language access, for example. That's a very simple metric to measure and see. As in Philadelphia, when I was the deputy mayor, we worked very hard to make this a sanctuary city. I'm very proud of that. We also worked very hard to make language access be something that was instituted. Now we need to go back and say, how is actually that working? Like, is it real? Are those phone lines really doing the job they're supposed to do? Are they real people who are being contacted? What is the quality of how we're treating people who might have some language barriers? Immigrants, and then highlighting the role immigrants have in our economy. I just pulled up a 2019 report. I think this was data from 2017, that immigrant-owned businesses employ 8 million Americans nationally. We wield $1.1 trillion in spending power. And yet we have such a sidebar position in much of what we do. So the growth in Pennsylvania is due to immigrants. No, you can't deny that. If you want Pennsylvania to be a forward-thinking, forward-moving state, we have to be an immigrant-friendly state. That's a given. So when just me being in that office makes a statement. And then when I actually use our audits to assess how we treat everybody, including immigrants, that's a whole other layer of engaging and making sure the rest of the people understand that there's a reason why we're doing it. These are valuable people and everybody's valuable and we all bring something to the table. So I intend to really use those lens if I were to be successful in winning this election.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So another kind of, I'd like to tag off of what you were saying about the economic power that immigrants kind of wield in Pennsylvania. One of the challenges that second generation is really committed to is bringing more immigrants, people of immigrant backgrounds into the political process and sort of showcasing that, yes, we do have this sort of economic power. We have these stories and those are a part of the American fabric and that they deserve a place in the political arena. And so what sort of experiences have you had bringing immigrants into the political process, involving them in your campaign? What's sort of response that you've gotten in terms of engaging them and starting these new conversations, which I think is more important now than ever?
Absolutely. So pre-COVID, we were, fundraising is a big part of campaigning because we don't have publicly financed elections, which I believe in, but that's another whole war to fight. So much of my support up until then was coming from immigrant, particularly Bangladeshi Americans, right? That's where I'm from. But it was an experience of an educational experience for them. Many who come from countries that actually look at politics as a very corrupt practice. So they don't want to get engaged. They've come here to actually get away from all that. They don't trust authority. And so they're like, why do you want to go work there? You should just, do your own thing, be a professional or have a business. Why do you want to get involved in that? And then when you show the connection and you sit down and really have a conversation, that all of those things you don't do in vacuum, because this is a country of laws. This is a country of those laws that get implemented at, the executive level. So if you don't have some, power or some representation, your issues are going to be overlooked. This is the reason for getting involved in politics. Whether we're talking about bullying, whether we're talking about what is happening with the total racist work that the president is doing, pushing back on all that needs someone who can actually say, hey, so many people in Pennsylvania elected me. I have a voice. I answer to them. And I know Pennsylvania is better than that. But here are people that are contributing to the country, contributing to the state, and yet having to be silent and sort of put their head down and do just stay out of the way. Instead, let's be bold. Let's say this is our contribution. We're here to stake a claim, and let's all respect each other and demand it. So that only comes when you have the power of saying I was elected by X many people, right? They can also take you down. But I think just being bold is something immigrants struggle with, because that puts you into the limelight, and then you're open to attacks. No one's perfect, so they worry about what if something happens to immigration status. These are all worries. Right now, Trump has put a special department to review naturalized citizens. That's happening right now. So someone like me, you were a baby when you came, right? I don't know what Siobhan's status is. If you're naturalized, you're getting scrutinized right now. And so imagine having someone in a statewide office who actually the job is about accountability and transparency and integrity, sending a message to the White House and saying, hey, and the people who surround them, that's not going to happen here. And so that's why, even at a cost, it's important to be there. And this is what I share with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's incredibly powerful and important. And so I'd like to give the audience an opportunity to kind of engage in the conversation as well. So we do have a question, I think, from Majid, if Siobhan wants to give him the mic.
Hi, Nina. It's great to have you with us tonight with Second Generation. As I understand the role of Auditor General in the state of Pennsylvania, it's an office that really oversees, audits, reviews the expenditures of all the state agencies. Mm-hmm. And so which operations, which agencies do you see as needing the highest priority oversight and auditing?
So in my campaign, the 3 priorities I outline are healthcare. Healthcare cost is really high, and it's an issue for all Pennsylvanians across 67 counties. And I'm specifically honing into something called pharmacy benefits manager, which is a supply chain position in the patient getting medicine that is prescribed by your doctor. That has a lack of transparency and accountability there. And it's in 2017, Pennsylvania paid close to $3 billion around Medicaid reimbursements for that role. And yet, the devil in the detail that happens with a job like that, the reason why we have not been able to look at them carefully is because they're subcontractors, and auditors, we can only audit direct contractors. So these are the kinds of things you want to unpack, because the efficiencies we can make from making sure there's transparency, so we can see what pharmacy benefits managers were supposed to pass on as efficiencies to our pharmacies, our local independent pharmacies, who would pass it on to you. So that's an issue that cuts across all communities, particularly people who might not have a lot of resources. We have seniors are a class that's really impacted by this. They are routinely cutting their medicine in half because they can't afford to pay for their prescriptions. So, and doctors, on another hand, are also very frustrated with this role, because it's the pharmacy benefits manager that is sort of in collusion with the pharmaceutical companies to decide what gets put in the formulary. And so the doctors, one day they're prescribing X medicine for asthma. 1 month later, their patient who is doing well on that medicine suddenly can't get that filled. And the doctor had no say in what was filled in that formulary. So these are all systemic issues that, while we want to make sure the money is done, accounted for, follow the money, and the performance is what is being done according to what the goals are, but it's the goals that we have to look at. When we put the money out to different departments, there's always how they're supposed to spend it. If there's not a good lens on that plan of what they're supposed to spend the money on, this is when you have these inefficiencies. So that's why I want to sort of have a very data-driven approach to understanding how the money is actually given out, meaning that's where we need to make some changes, in addition to actually finding efficiencies in the use of the money.
Absolutely, yeah. I think Joe Kahn also has a question. If we could put the mic to him.
Hey, Nina, great to see you. Great to see everyone.
Hey, the new biker. He's been biking all over the place. Two-wheeler. Congrats.
Yeah. Oh, no, the biker's over here.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I saw both of them.
So, Nina, one of the things that has impressed many of us, especially Andy and I have known you for a long time, long before you became a candidate for office, has been the way that you have recognized the existence and importance of so many immigrant communities that are often completely ignored by not just office holders, but by campaigns until maybe the last week before the election. And I remember all the lessons that you shared about all the vibrant communities of Philadelphia that you had engaged with over your many, many years as a Philadelphia resident. And I was wondering if you could share with us some of the lessons that you've learned running statewide about some of those hidden gem communities across Pennsylvania where people have just been waiting for candidates to show up and engage and say hello and speak to the issues that they care about, which is really what Second Generation is all about.
Absolutely. So in my campaign, I've been finding pockets of people all over. For me, there's a large, vibrant South Asian community there, including Indian and Nepali and different South Asians over there. Festival just before COVID-19 happened, and it just was a completely and many of them are very integrated into the communities there in the smaller rural communities. So I've been finding pockets of folks who are excited. In Lancaster County, for example, there's a large community of Bhutanese of Nepalese descent there. So it's about just having awareness that when you meet people, just simple things like paying attention to how they even, whether they shake hands with you or not. You know, if you are someone who's Buddhist, they might not want to shake your hand. So if you do a little homework before you meet people, it's just simple courtesies that can go such a long way, because most people are so overlooked, and they're, you know, having to make do without sharing any part of who they are. So any chance you give people to kind of showcase who they are and give them a space to share what makes them really proud of their heritage, I think goes a long way. So that's the overriding, you know, principle I operate on, because I know what that feels like, you know, to be minimized and marginalized. But talking about just this particular COVID-19 issue, you know, the Asian community has been really impacted, particularly in New York. I have my older daughter lives there. She's been working, you know, she's not very fluent in my language. I've been sending her videos of what she should say, and she's hearing it phonetically. She knows the words, but how it sounds, and she's going out to communities around the PPE issue and the economic issue. Here, I've been getting, you know, people, even though I'm not in elected office or any kind of office, I'm connecting people to their state reps, to their, you know, to the offices inside Philadelphia, particularly. They don't know how to even get their PIN number to apply for the, you know, unemployment issues. So such a need. And also it's a trust factor. This whole relationship, as you know, Joe, in politics is, do people trust you? Do they know what your values are? What are you bringing to the table? Are you competent to do the job? And then will you forget them once they give you the vote? That, I think, is, they have to know you. So I take my time and make sure people kind of, you know, sometimes you sit for, and Andy Toy will know this, we've sat at a lot of banquets where your presence, even though I don't know Chinese, but you know what the feeling is in the room, and they see you, that you see them and they see you. This is fundamentally why we have government. Government needs to see you and then meet your needs. And so I just find it exciting to connect other people whom I meet with other communities and say, hey, you have a similar issue. Why don't you guys connect? And, you know, you can come up with better solutions together. Building solidarity is a fundamental issue that I work on, particularly with our African-American community, which is, you know, has been marginalized for so long in this country. That's very important to me. So I try to do that every chance I get.
Thank you for that, Nina. So we have two more questions. I'm going to hand it over to Andy next.
Oh, thank you, Pavini. I can't figure out how to raise my hand. I'm sorry. There's no button here. Maybe it's me. It's probably me. Sorry about that. I'm too old. So first of all, I preface my statement with my question. I'm sorry, with the fact that just Nina and I go back a long ways, and Nina was actually on my campaign. Nina has helped a lot of other people, and we should all be appreciative of that, her work, in raising the profile of immigrants and raising the profile of people of color, people who are marginalized for sure, and we all should appreciate that. And I do, and I am your supporter, Nina. I just have a couple of questions, though, because I'm still kind of don't know what the Auditor General does that much, but I'm wondering whether, so I have two questions. One is, have you been talking, hopefully, to the current Auditor General, seems like a good guy? Are there things that he's told you that he would have liked to do that maybe you can push forward? And then the other question is more about just what I think sort of where Joe was heading to, which is like the horse race, like how are you doing, and how are you going to win, basically?
Yeah. So we'll start with the first question, talking to Eugene De Pasquale. His name is actually Eugenio, by the way, but he writes Eugene. So, you know, from time to time, he's been very helpful, and, you know, I think is helpful to everyone, all the candidates running. Has been very friendly and giving me information anytime I want something, to be clarified. He's great. I've also been actually talking to auditors within the office. I don't know if people know that there's been a decimation of the budget of the Auditor General's office in the last few years. So it used to have 800 people, and it's down to 392 something to that effect right now, doing the same 5,000 plus audits. So it's a lot of stress on particularly the field auditors who go out, the 1, 2s, and 3s, who are not the CPAs sitting and designing the audits, but they're actually the ones collecting the information. They go out in the field. So there's definitely the value of the Auditor General's office is something I want to really uphold. I've been speaking to legislators currently here during this election to actually see how much they know and how much they interact with the Auditor General's office. It's minimal, right? And so they see it on the website, they see the audits, which are, Eugene's done a great job of highlighting issues, but what's not happened is the engagement piece. And particularly with our state legislators and our local legislators, they can use the data in the Auditor General's office for good public policy. And that's the role I want to unpack under every time you do an audit, you're collecting not just the information about, does everything add up, right? And are the internal controls there? That's what the audit actually assesses. But every time you collect that data, you're also collecting data about what is that department or that entity actually doing in terms of service. So I'll give you a quick example. For the correctional facilities, for example, the most recent audits have been very superficial. They've been collecting audits on the numbers of incidents of violence perpetrated by inmates, right? People who are incarcerated. Not the entire population who serve the correctional facilities. So that's a problem right there. 2, just getting that data without understanding what are the resources that have been available to these folks, you don't get a full picture of whether or not this correctional facility is actually functioning in the way it's supposed to. So, I'm someone who thinks there needs to be criminal justice reform, particularly about when we incarcerate people, what are we actually expecting them to be once their sentence is over? And that really has to be service delivery within the correctional facility. So you can unpack a lot, and then you can take a look 67 county-wide about all the different entities that are there. There's not 67 of them. Different counties have correctional facilities. You can actually do a comparison and then have that information to actually shape public policy, to say, hey, this is working here, this is a best practice here, let's take it over there where it's not working. So there's all kinds of ways to use that. It's not currently used in that manner. I want to take Eugene's legacy of some of the audits he's done, particularly around the healthcare issue I mentioned earlier, the pharmacy benefits manager. He actually has one of the first people to come out and talk about it. And there's a bipartisan bill now on the state floor. I don't know where it's happening with COVID, but they're really looking to make some transparency around that. So that was where that worked, right? We're taking the information, sharing it, and using the recommendation in the audit to actually change something so we Pennsylvanians can benefit. That's what I would like to do. Talking about the horse race. So I don't know if other people have done the poll we did, which was just as COVID was breaking, right with no bio red of all 6 of us, I'm 4 points ahead. With the bio red, I'm 34 points ahead, right? So and I'm ahead in a lot of groups when they hear who I am, because my approach to this candidacy is not just that, this is a functionary's job. This is about a leadership job, about using this platform for progressive change. No one else articulates it quite like that. They're like, oh, we're going to do the job. I'm a CPA, so I can, check and see the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. Well, I'm a PhD in science who understands the power of data and analysis, right? And that's what I'm bringing to the table. And having been a deputy mayor, looking at how budgets are set up, moral documents, and trying to find efficiencies in a $4 billion budget. We were required to do that. served on Philadelphia Foundation for 9 years on their investment committee, safeguarding $500 million, as well as this grant-making committee, and finally having our own business. My husband and I have to operate in a financial and an audit environment. But putting all that aside, what values are you bringing to the table to use your skill set to actually make a difference for Pennsylvanians? And that has resonated with voters. And so I'm running ahead with the women before and after bio. I'm really good with women. I'm good with communities of color. I think the only demographic where I cannot come out, not that great, is older white men. So I'm going to, my goal, COVID has disrupted some of the GOTV work. And also only 2 people in the race really have the resources, myself and the guy from the Western Pennsylvania, who is really using his family name to do a lot of it. Here's another thing about being an immigrant. You have no coattails. You don't have, I didn't come on, with a family name to say I can use this or do that. This is us with what we have done on my merit. So I drive that home when I can, that, hey, I have no big name to use. This is me. I built it. I'm here. And these are the skill sets I bring to the table. People like that. People like that. When, this is the scrappy, get yourself up. My ad that's going to come out has me in a picture of waitressing when I was in college. I had to decide whether I wanted mushrooms on a hamburger at Burger King because it cost extra cents. There was a time when that made a difference in my life. I remember that. I wore a coat with a lining that was torn, and I would not let anybody help me put a coat on because I had to carefully weave my hand through that coat not to get stuck in that lining. Yeah, so I know what that means and it feels like. I might be doing very well now, but that's not who I am. This is a work in progress that started with deciding to spend a few extra cents on mushrooms on a burger. So I make sure people know that.
Thank you, Nina. So in the interest of time, we will
okay, your voice is coming garbled.
Yeah, you're breaking up, Bhavani. So we're going to go to Jamie. Jamie, you've got your hand up for a question.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Nina. First, I want to congratulate you on winning Second Generation's endorsement. I also had the wonderful opportunity of receiving an endorsement from Second Generation, and it meant a lot. It was not only sort of a vote of confidence for me as a new entrant into politics, but it was also a source of critical resources in a very tough race for the 3rd District Council seat. So congratulations.
Thank you.
As the 3rd District Council member in Philadelphia, I represent a place where over 35% of the people, including many people of color and immigrants, live in poverty. And so you've talked some about this, but I'm interested in hearing more about how a win for you as Auditor General makes a difference in their everyday lives. So I would love to hear you expound on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, how we distribute our dollars is very critical. So the equity, the E of equity is important to me. Not only do we want transparency and accountability, make sure there's no corruption and all of that, but how are we using those dollars and how are they getting sent to certain spaces? I'm the only Philadelphia candidate in the race, only person from Southeast Pennsylvania. We haven't had anyone in statewide office from Philadelphia, I think since Frendel. Actually from Philadelphia. And what that has done is the advocacy we need to actually show what Philadelphia brings to the state is important. And do we get a commensurate return on that dollar that we are making for Pennsylvania? That's one of the first things I actually want to sort of articulate and see if we can come up with some numbers on that and say, hey, while we're doing this, we have communities in Philadelphia that could really benefit from resources and get into the wealth building that needs to happen so there's generational wealth. And those are the kinds of ways I want to see if you're giving, say, for example, we're giving money for violence, state money that is coming to end violence. how exactly is it being delivered, and who's actually benefiting at the end of the day? Are the communities you mentioned reflected in getting those resources? And that's the audit we can do, to see at the end of the day who's getting it, and saying, and then asking the question and making the recommendation that, hey, that dollar could be spent even more efficiently with more impact if you were to be investing in folks who are being overlooked. So I want to use that kind of lens to actually do the recommendations. That actually means changing the audits somewhat, the design, because right now they're not even assessing those things. So the design of the audit, working with the CPAs to do more than just internal controls and making sure the balance sheets match up, are really important. I'll give, if I have time, I can give you one more example, which is unrelated seemingly to, you know, people, but it's a tax that the state gets from gas and oil, and it's called the liquid fuels tax. We collect it, it goes to the Department of Transportation. They then divvy it up based on a formula, which is people and mileage, how much roads there are, back to counties, then down to municipalities. Yesterday, I was on a call with some rural counties, and they were saying they haven't had any improvements in their streets and roads since 2009. And so right there would be a flag. But the biggest flag I saw, I was reviewing public audits, and I was looking at the carryover of funds from one year to another. In some places, that was very big, and some places in this category was a few $100s. Something is awry when you're getting $100,000 plus being carried over. You were supposed to spend it for doing the roads and the signs and the snow removal, and some places are not. So one of the first things I would do in that category is review all 67 counties and then take a look at that calculation, because something is awry in that calculation where you are not having the factors that reflect the needs of that community that you're servicing. So that would go into things like whether it's talking about roads, or it's talking about resources for gun violence, or it's actually health and human services. You know, maternal mortality is another one. I can go on and on about how I'm looking to look at those dollars that are used that can literally save lives, right? When we look at our healthcare system, why Black women are dying 3 times more than white women, and all women are dying more than they used to 25 years ago. There's a real problem in how we are treating women who are giving birth. And when those Medicaid dollars we put out, I can follow that dollar and see what is the outcome of that dollar and how was it used. So I have a lot of ideas of how we can, the accountability piece of hospitals, much like the CRA, Community Reinvestment Act for banks, I want to have one for hospitals, because the COVID-19 actually showed the sharp, you know, problems in the disparity of care. So
yeah, I mean, these are all incredibly critical points to mention, and this was a very informative session, just learning about what you represent, Nina, but also what you're trying to bring in terms of your campaign. So thank you for taking some time and spending it with Second Generation. We're incredibly excited, as I mentioned, to offer you an endorsement. And if everybody who has joined us in this conversation found it valuable and you would like to support the immigrant cause, you know, we're always raising money to make sure that we can keep funding these candidates and pushing them forward so that these narratives and these critical issues could be in the political arena, essentially. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we will be hosting another session with our other endorsed candidate, who is Nikhil Saval. So please keep your eyes out for that announcement, and we hope to see you again soon.